Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to help you write an introduction, or certainly give you some advice about what an introduction looks like in a geographical project. The first thing you're going to have to do is reflect back on your aim, which we did in task number 1. And your aim outlines what you're intending to do, what you're intending to achieve. Therefore, your introduction should be an expansion of that and start to flesh out exactly what you're aiming to achieve, what this study will focus on, why you're doing it, and give some clear ideas or at least communicate how you will be conducting this study. So let's just break that down into 3 areas. You're going to be looking for a paragraph, not a long paragraph, but the very first thing you want to write is an outline about what the investigation is going to be focused on. The aim itself is just an aim. It doesn't really flesh it out. So you're going to want to expand on that aim and indicate the key focuses of this project, which in this case obviously is to do with traffic and well-being. So you have to have formulated a clear idea in your group what well-being is and how traffic can influence well-being. Now, the next part is the critical part. The first part is just gives the reader, who is your audience at the end of the day, a clear indication of where you're going. The second part, which we have here, is in the geographical project, is worth the majority of the marks that are allocated for your introduction. And it's the rationale. Why are we studying it? So you might be inclined to have your own reasons in your mind, but that's not what the examiners are looking for. They're interested in why you're studying it from your own point of view, but that's then got to be supported by some evidence. So if you, for example, have found a really good research paper online that outlines the kinds of impacts that traffic is having on people's well-being, and that can be from anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be the United Kingdom, and it could be based on a country study or a city study or anything you've found. And of course, it could be any definition of well-being. So when you read some research into this, you might find people have different viewpoints on well-being, and also traffic itself. Are we talking about the volume of cars passing? Are we talking about air pollution generated by cars? Or are we talking about noise pollution generated by cars? So we have to kind of consider those things before we go ahead and write this. What element of traffic are we going to look at? Are we going to look at all of those elements? Or are you going to be looking at all those elements? And what aspect of well-being, human well-being, are you investigating? Now, that's going to involve you finding 2 or 3 sources to support the reason for conducting this study. So, I mean, some of the best projects I've read in the past is where a student has found an academic piece of research and used that evidence to support why this kind of study is important to conduct. And what you would be looking to do, and certainly communicating in your introduction, is that you're testing these particular studies against at St Andrews, and you're going to see if the kind of ideas that people have been discovering from other parts of the world are consistent and are found in St Andrews. So you find a nice research paper that looks at the impact of traffic on human well-being, and you might want to lift a quote or a fact or a figure from that source. You actually want to refer to the source, to what the source says, and of course the bit that you pick out from the source that you decide to quote or reference, if it's a fact, for example, or a figure, that needs to be supporting something to do with traffic and its impact on well-being. When you put a quote or a fact or a figure, there should be a wee citation after it because you've found it from somewhere. Now, I'm just going to talk very quickly about what citations look like. So if we look at Wikipedia, which is a really good example of a web source, lots of students use it. It's a totally legitimate source. It's got its strengths and its weaknesses. And when you go into Wikipedia and you research anything, so here's the very first article on Wikipedia, you will see highlighted in blue are lots of bits of information that have come from somewhere. These are all links. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you, we'll do a little search. Let's look up traffic. Okay. And there we are. Do a little search on traffic. Now, I'm not saying you use Wikipedia, but you will notice when you read this, traffic laws are the laws which govern traffic and regulate vehicles, while rules of the road are both laws and the informal rules that may have developed over time to facilitate the orderly and timely flow of traffic. Now, that is a quote that you might choose to use to support one of the reasons why you are conducting this study, why it's so important that this study is conducted. And you'll notice here there's a little number, and that's a citation. So when you quote somebody or introduce a fact or a figure, or what you're writing is actually just kind of a rewording of what somebody else has said on a source you've found, and that's legitimate as well too. You don't need to use their exact words. But if you are using somebody else's ideas, then put a little number. The very first time you do it, it'll be number 1. The second time you do it, it'll be number 2. And that links to a bibliography, and there we can see the actual source where that came from. Okay. Now, as a marker, I'm going to be looking at this, and I'll be looking for a number of different sources that have been cited accurately. And at the end of the entire mini project that you're doing, I'd like to see the bibliography. So make sure you include the web link for where you got that information, and that you use the little numbers both in your text when you're writing it, just like I was showing you a second ago. So you write something, if I just scroll to the top, and it refers to somebody else's work. So you put the little brackets in number 1 and the close brackets, and then at the very end of your document, you just copy the web link that you got it from, and you also put a little number 1 in brackets in front of that web link. So I know that that text is linked to that web source. Okay, right. As I've said in the instructions, I'd like you to do that 2 or 3 times. So you've got a really strong rationale for conducting this study. The last thing you're going to be doing is how this study will be conducted. Okay, and it says this will be a brief summary of the data required to complete this study. So you as a group need to talk about the data you plan to gather to answer your aim, which is the impact that traffic or variations in traffic is having on human well-being. So you need to sort of say, we're going to need data on this and this and this. So you have to think about the actual data you're going to gather. So that could be, for example, traffic volumes across different locations in St Andrews will need to be gathered to look at how traffic varies. And at those locations, we'll also need to do, in this case, what it is you're going to gather data from people, which is possibly going to be some kind of survey, well-being survey that you're going to construct. You don't need to be too detailed in how you're going to do it. Do not tell me how. That's for the methodology, which comes later. It's just that to conduct this study, we're going to do this and this. You might also, and I would suggest you do, have a discussion in your group about how you might present that data afterwards. So what kind of maps might you use, or graphs, or maybe even statistical tests that you might use to test whether there's some kind of relationship between traffic and well-being. Okay, and that's this little bit covered, how you're going to analyze the data. Okay, now once you've done all of that, you might choose, and this is a good kind of, this shows a little bit of flair when you write introductions. You might actually want to start before you actually give us the first paragraph here on what the investigation is going to focus on. You might want to find a really powerful quote from somebody. It could be anybody. I mean, if it's somebody famous, all the better. But if it's not, it doesn't matter. But you can start with a quotation with the name of the person who came up with the quote. And that's the very first thing somebody reads. And obviously, in this case, it's got to be something that's linked to traffic and well-being, and what traffic has been doing to human beings ever since the car was invented. So if you find something like that, it's really good because it really engages the reader. It draws their attention to your introduction. And if you are going to start your introduction with that, then do remember, put a little citation after the quote and put it into your bibliography.